Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and like this video for more content.
The day is perfect for a stroll. I must visit the market.
Father, what was in that box? I think I'll regret it for the rest of my life. It was my elder brother who said those words. But how differently that regret would flow for him and for me at that moment, neither of us knew. And there was a shocking reason why this situation unfolded as it did. To those of you listening to this story right now, please leave a comment telling me where you live, how old you are, and what you're doing while listening. I read every single one. In Namcheon of Hanyang, in the inner alley known for its fine water quality, stood our family's dye house. Or rather, I should say, stood. Because now the shape of that alley, the indigo scent that filled it, and the image of Father standing there with his hands stained with dye, all exist only in memory. My father's name was Kang Jae-moon. He lost his parents early and entered a dye house as an errand boy around the age of 12 to learn the trade. At first, he started by carrying cloth and drawing water, he said. The eye for selecting dyes, the sense for gauging temperature, all were things he learned with his body. By the time he was 20, word had spread that he could produce colors better than most master craftsmen, and when he opened his own shop after turning 30, regular customers were already lining up. The people of Namcheon called Father Master Dyer Kang. It was an honorific for craftsmen, but it meant more than just having good skills. Once he took on a job, he saw it through to the end, and he never used promissory notes or credit. It was natural for households that traded with him to return again, and when children of those households married or when they were in mourning, the place they entrusted their cloth was always our shop. That's how Father grew one dye house into a place with 3 attached shops. Next to the workshop, a few rice fields appeared, and the family came to be known as quite reputable in Namcheon. I was proud of such a father. No, rather than proud, I simply grew up thinking this was the natural order of the world. Father was always someone who stood in that place, and our home was always a place that turned with that scent. That sense of naturalness began to shake in the autumn of my 22nd year. Father collapsed. At first, he said his body just felt a bit heavy with the arrival of autumn. Father himself said so, and I wanted to believe those words. But when a week passed, and he still couldn't come to the workshop, and days continued when he couldn't finish even half a bowl of rice, an expression I'd never seen before began to appear on Mother's face. She was someone who spared her words, but she became even more silent. On the evening after the physician visited, a small sound leaked from the inner quarters. I stood in the courtyard, knowing what that sound was, yet pretending not to. My brother was 5 years older than me. His name was Kang Jae-woon, and from childhood he resembled Father with his deft hands. He had picked up the dye house work by watching, and when Father was away, he would take charge of running the workshop. Those around us naturally assumed my brother would succeed Father. My brother himself seemed to think so too, and it wasn't far from the truth. I was different. To be honest, I didn't particularly care for dyeing work. I didn't like how the dye smell seeped into clothes, how color remained on hands without fading, how the same tasks repeated endlessly to the point of tedium. I never told Father how I felt directly. There was no reason to say it, nor did I have the courage. I just vaguely thought that while doing my part in the household, I would someday find the direction I wanted. Father summoned us brothers about 2 weeks after he collapsed. The room was quiet. Normally, when entering from outside, the workshop smell would greet you first, but that day there was no such scent. As I stepped into the room, I found myself strangely softening my footsteps. Father sat with the blanket pulled up to his waist, his body half raised. The sight was unfamiliar. I had no memory of seeing Father lying down or leaning back. My brother entered and sat first, and I took a seat beside him. Father was silent for a long time. He looked at us, then looked toward the window, then moved his gaze back to us. No words were exchanged during this. Just quietly time passed. And then father pushed forward 2 boxes that had been beside the blanket. One looked heavy. It was a wooden box with a lock, and even without opening it, you could sense that something solid was inside. I learned later that it contained silver coins, transaction documents, and land-related papers. The other was small. It was wrapped in cloth, but wrapped roughly. Father had clearly wrapped it himself. When you unwrapped the cloth, there would be an old book and a small seal. The book was a dyeing manual Father had written over decades. Methods for producing colors, water temperature and timing, material ratios, records of failures, and what was salvaged from them, everything was crammed into that book. The seal was what Father stamped on cloth when making deliveries, engraved with the characters, Master Dyer Kang. There was no talk of the shops, no talk of the fields, no words about how to run the business going forward. Father simply said this: choose what you will take, but your name will remain as you choose. That was all. My brother and I looked at each other. Father seemed to have no intention of saying more. His eyes were closed and his breathing was long and slow. I looked back and forth between the 2 boxes, the heavy one and the small, worn one. Between those 2, I felt that a choice lay there, something both very simple and very heavy. My brother reached out first. My brother's hand moved first. There was no hesitation. He didn't glance down for a moment, didn't steady his breath, didn't look at me once more. As if he had decided long ago, my brother reached toward the heavy wooden box. He didn't open the lock. As if simply pulling it before his knees was enough, my brother placed the box in front of himself. And then my brother said, "Business is ultimately about money and connections." Father's eyes remained closed. No response came, no nod. Whether that meant the words were right or wrong or simply heard, nothing could be read from Father's expression. My brother took it as consent. Or perhaps from the start, he never thought consent was necessary. I looked at the remaining box. Small and old, wrapped in cloth. What my brother didn't take. What my brother never intended to take from the beginning. I pulled it toward me. When I unwrapped the cloth, the smell of old paper emerged. The dyeing manual's cover had turned grayish-black with hand oils, and dye stains remained here and there. The seal lay small beside it, but despite its size, it felt heavy when held. I stroked with my thumb the surface engraved with the characters, Master Dyer Kang. It was the name Father had stamped throughout his life. As I left the room, I looked back at Father once. Father's eyes were still closed. I wanted to say something but didn't know what to say. I just closed the door. The kitchen was located a short distance from the inner quarters. It was the cusp of winter, yet even at that hour hands were moving inside the kitchen because of Yeonbun. Yeonbun was a servant who worked in our household. She was a year younger than me and spoke little. She first came to our house around age 10, they said, and after that mainly ran errands between the kitchen and workshop. No great role had been given to her. She drew water, rinsed cloth, and sometimes helped prepare starch. But I had been watching Yeonbun for a long time. She first caught my eye when I was 16. Father was rinsing cloth in the workshop when he tilted his head, noting the water temperature wasn't right. Yeonbun, who was drawing water beside him, briefly dipped her hand in the basin, then, without a word, went to the fire and reduced the flame slightly. Father seemed not to notice. I noticed. And it wasn't just once. The way she checked starch consistency with her hands. The way she scanned with her eyes whether color was even when unfolding drained cloth. The way her body knew that even with the same dye, soaking time must vary slightly with the weather. Yeonbun was doing these things though no one had taught her. What Father had learned in his body over decades, Yeonbun was absorbing just by watching from beside him. I didn't think it was mere observational skill. She was someone whose hands remembered sensations. Such people are rare. You can teach technique, but you cannot teach that sense. What Father possessed was that, and what Yeonbun possessed was also that. That day I said to Yeonbun, "Will you come out with me?" Yeonbun paused her hands briefly. She looked at me. She didn't ask what I meant. She just quietly nodded. Rumor spread quickly. The mouths of Namcheon people were always like that. Not long after word emerged that Kang Jae-moon lay in his sickbed, stories circulated that the two sons had divided the boxes. That the eldest son took money and documents, the youngest son took an old book and seal, and that the youngest son had taken with him a servant who worked in the kitchen. People already knew all this. The reactions were mostly in the same direction. A secret manual is still just paper. You need money to buy cloth and maintain business contacts. They said the eldest son was clever, and sure enough he is. What is the youngest thinking? He even took that lowly servant? That's a sign of ruin. Ruin. Those words didn't fail to reach my ears. When passing the market entrance, when going out to buy supplies, I saw familiar faces murmuring from afar, then averting their eyes. Eyes that pitied me, or eyes that saw me as foolish. To be honest, at first those gazes weren't entirely painless. I'm human too, after all. To say people's judgments matter not at all would be a lie. Especially when compared side by side with my brother, it was worse. My brother had already arranged the shop location, made fresh introductions at several business contacts, and was moving quickly. My brother's appearance from the outside was clear. He was someone with money, with documents, with business contacts. I took one old book, a small seal, and one quiet-spoken servant, and obtained a 2-room space on the outskirts of Namcheon. That was the beginning. On the first day, as soon as Yeonbun entered the space, she walked a full circle around the room. She checked the direction of the window, examined where the water came from. Then she lightly pressed the courtyard floor with the toe of her shoe and said this, "The drainage looks good." That was all Yeonbun said that day. But within that single phrase, the work sequence was already contained. Yeonbun knew what needed to be done here. She knew from the beginning. I opened the dyeing manual. Father's handwriting was not neat. There were parts written hastily, and sometimes notes added in margins were more important than the main text. Reading through it, stories of Father's failures were written in far more detail than his successes. On what days colors came out muddy, at what temperatures cloth was damaged, which materials fell short of expectations. He was someone who recorded failures. Looking at this, I felt I understood for the first time the meaning of what Father had chosen. The shops, fields, and documents were what he possessed now. The dyeing manual and seal were what would be built going forward. Father gave the present to my brother and gave the future to me. Whether this was Father's intention or just how I wanted to read it, I didn't know. But thinking this way, the manual in my hand felt somewhat different. It was heavy. It had been weighty from the start, but it became heavier still. Outside, Namdaemun was different from the main Jongno street. Jongno was a place of sound. Fabric shops, paper shops, apothecaries, the footsteps of people coming and going, voices bargaining, sounds of loading and unloading goods. By day and by evening, something was always in motion. Opening a shop there was like placing a boat on water already flowing. There was a current, so you simply rode it. The area near the laundry grounds outside Namdaemun was not such a place. Women who came out early in the morning carrying laundry gathered and dispersed. It became quiet by midday and even quieter by evening. There was nothing worth calling a proper shop, and most passers-by were simply those brushing past on their way in or out of the city gates. Naturally, the land was cheap. I established my place there. I called it 2 rooms, but in reality it was a cramped size for working. A narrow clearing in front that was too embarrassing to call a courtyard, though fortunately the laundry area was close for water. From the first day, Yeonbun cleaned the space and organized the workspace without complaint. Beside her, I read the dyeing manual again. The question was what to start with. Deciding not to work with silk was determined from the beginning. To handle silk required capital first to obtain good materials. There needed to be margin to absorb failure. Customers who entrusted Silk would not remain silent if the results were even slightly unsatisfactory. From the position of first establishing a place, bearing that risk was difficult. So I thought in the opposite direction. Reviving old clothes. People could not easily discard clothes. Tailoring new clothes cost money, and households without that money mended worn clothes or simply wore faded ones. Re-dyeing and repairing those clothes to make them usable, that was work I could begin. Material costs were low, and even if I failed, if the customer had already given up on the item, the damage was less. Yeonbun thought the same. Even before I explained, she was already looking in that direction. The first customer came about 10 days after we established the place. A woman who often came to the laundry area. She was elderly, with rough hands. She entered carrying a bundle of clothing under her arm and looked toward Yeonbun before me. When coming to an unfamiliar place, people typically first gauge others by age and gender. Yeonbun would have been more comfortable than a young man like me. Yeonbun received and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a single skirt. It must have once been good fabric, but worn long, color had fled in patches, and the hem had completely lost its luster. It was difficult even to guess what color it had originally been. Yeonbun held the skirt in her hands for a moment. She wasn't simply looking. She moved her fingers along the grain of the fabric. She lifted the lining side slightly. She took it toward the light and examined it while changing angles. None of this took long, yet somehow it looked like reading the cloth. Then Yeonbun said, "If we revive this with plum blossom color, it will look like new clothing." The woman narrowed her eyes. Plum blossom color? A pale pink, but not just any pink. The edge must carry a slightly cool light. If that color enters this cloth, the worn parts will actually appear deeper. It might be better than new. The woman wore a skeptical expression. But when she came to retrieve the skirt a few days later, her hands paused while unwrapping the bundle. For a while she said nothing, then briefly asked, "How much?" I received payment. It wasn't much money. But in the woman's retreating back, the way she held the bundle differed from when she arrived. That was the beginning. Word of mouth found its own path without being shown the way. Talk that spread from the laundry area went to the alleys, and talk that spread from the alleys went to the market. They entrusted old clothes and they became like new. The eye for color is extraordinary. The price isn't so expensive. Such talk circulated and customers gradually increased. But around a month later, somewhat different customers began coming. At first I didn't notice. People came dressed shabbily, but the quality of fabric they brought was excessively fine. There were people who said first, "No need to ask my name." There were people who surveyed their surroundings once while handing over clothes. One afternoon, a middle-aged man entered. His appearance was plain, but his gait was different. Not the walk of someone who had lived long with bowed head. He set down his bundle while lowering his voice. Refined without catching the master's eye. Inconspicuous. I unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a rummy jacket. The color was good, but it was old. There was a stain of unknown origin in one place, and the sleeve ends were minutely frayed. "Whose is it?" The man didn't answer. I didn't ask further. I learned for the first time then that not asking was the courtesy to maintain in this situation. Yeonbun took the clothing, quietly examined it, looked once more at the stained part, then looked at me. I looked too. To hide that stain required raising the color overall, yet without killing the original texture of the ramie. The frayed part at the sleeve ends could be made invisible if processed from a different direction. As the man said, refined yet inconspicuous. Both requirements had to be met simultaneously. It will take several days. The man nodded and left. After that incident, similar customers continued. Servants from noble households, or people who managed household affairs. Some had secretly brought out their master's clothes. Some had come to repair their own clothes while avoiding their master's eyes. The reasons differed, but there was something in common. It must not be conspicuous. It mustn't look newly purchased. Yet it also mustn't look worn. It had to appear that what was already there had simply improved. This was a matter of technique, but also a matter of reading ability, preserving what the fabric originally possessed while adding something to it, making the addition invisible. Yeonbun did this well. Which fabric wanted which color, at what temperature, and how it should be handled so the original grain wouldn't be damaged. Yeonbun possessed that sense. I compared what father had written down in the dyeing manual with what Yeonbun was doing. Many parts matched. What father had organized in writing, Yeonbun knew in her body. It was wondrous yet also frightening. Saying frightening might sound strange, but I couldn't explain exactly where that sense came from. That she knew without anyone teaching her, and that her knowledge overlapped with father's knowledge. I began gradually thinking around that time that it might not be simple coincidence, but I never asked Yeonbun about it. Rather than not finding the timing to ask, perhaps I was afraid to ask. Instead, I read the dyeing manual every night, and by day learned work beside Yeonbun. Whether learned is even the right expression, I don't know. I was the master of this work and Yeonbun was a servant. But who actually led the way inside the workshop, both I and Yeonbun knew. Without either of us voicing that fact, we began work every morning. My brother raised his sign less than 2 months after father passed away. It was large and vivid. The characters Kang Dye House were written clearly enough to be seen from the Jongno Main Street. The wood was new too, and word spread that the calligrapher was someone of renown. I also heard the money spent on that one sign exceeded a month's rent for a small room. My brother didn't seem to think it wasteful. He held an opening celebration, too. He invited nearby fabric shop owners and honored business contacts. They said there were even people who frequented the government offices. Liquor and food came out generously, and I heard the gathering continued late into the night. My brother mentioned father's name several times at that gathering. They said that he was Kang Jae-moon's son, that he was the one who inherited that workshop. I didn't attend that celebration. I don't even know if I was invited. Probably I wasn't. My brother's method was swift. He employed good craftsmen to delegate work while he himself managed transactions and connections. His approach was to identify which patterns were trending now, which households had upcoming weddings, what events were scheduled at government offices, and approach them first. For trending patterns, he spent money to obtain templates. In some cases, the sources were unclear, but my brother seemed not to care. For a while at first, it worked. There was trust left by father's name. When people heard Kang Dye House, they first thought of father, and that trust naturally transferred to my brother. Several business contacts continued without break, and new customers came. My brother seemed to accept this as results he himself had created. Talk began circulating gradually among craftsmen a few months later. Though he said he delegated work, in reality he demanded quick delivery while cutting prices. My brother also chose the materials, and increasingly he selected cheap ones. The craftsmen did their best with given materials, but there were limits to producing good results from materials that weren't good to begin with. My brother either didn't understand those limits well or knew but didn't care. The incident erupted on a day when spring rain fell. It was fabric delivered for a government event. Not a large scale, but it was for an official occasion, and for my brother it was the first time directly conducting business with the government office. I heard my brother had cultivated this connection through efforts at various gatherings. Rain came on the event day. It wasn't particularly heavy rain, not weather that would halt the event. But when the event ended and they organized the fabric, problems revealed themselves. Color had fled. Some parts had bled, and some parts bore traces where water had run down to the hem. It was the result of rushed processing with cheap materials. Whether it was my brother's fault, the craftsman's fault, or the material's fault, I don't know precisely. But my brother was the one who delivered it, and Kang Dye House name was attached to it. The responsibility returned to my brother. I heard the government office didn't raise official issues, but mouths on that side moved. Kang's workshop is only superficially decent. It's different from father's time. That talk didn't take long to spread. My brother tried to cover it in another way. He held better drinking gatherings. He distributed more expensive gifts. He met more frequently with people he already knew and created occasions with new people. It was a method of filling lost face with connections. My brother had always spoken well at such gatherings. He was skilled at matching atmosphere, knew how to select words people wanted to hear. But such occasions weren't free. Once you raised the standard, lowering it was difficult. Holding gatherings at the previous level brought talk that the class had fallen. My brother couldn't endure that, so he had to keep raising it. The more he raised it, the more money it cost, and outflow exceeded inflow. Debt arose. At first it was small. He thought he'd borrow a bit from business contacts and settle it at the next delivery. But deliveries didn't return to normal. Trust once shaken recovered more slowly than expected, and rather than wait, my brother created yet another gathering. It was debt covering debt. Like a snowball rolling once direction was set, stopping became increasingly difficult. I didn't hear these circumstances directly. They were words that trickled in bit by bit through people on the Namchon side. My brother never said directly that times were hard. I didn't seek him out first either. Though brothers, we were already living then like strangers to each other's affairs. Around that time, somewhat different types of customers began coming to our dyeing workshop. At first it was hard to notice. Their dress was still plain, and the manner of entrusting clothes didn't differ greatly. But the quality of fabric they brought was different, and the way they asked about price after entrusting was different. Not how much does it cost, but first asking when can I receive it. One afternoon a woman came. Age was difficult to gauge. Her dress was neat but not flashy, and she spared words. What she brought was a jade-colored skirt. Old, but you could see at a glance it had been good from the start. Color had dyed in patches, and there were stains in 2 places. Yeonbun took it. After examining the fabric for a while, Yeonbun looked at me. I looked too. This fabric couldn't be handled carelessly. Not the method of raising color, but keeping what it possessed almost as is while reviving only the dead parts. Not adding but restoring. That was far more difficult work. It may take a bit longer than a few days. The woman nodded. She said not to rush. When that jade skirt emerged again, the woman was wordless for a while. The stains had vanished, and the dead color was alive. Yet it hadn't become like new. The old remained as it was, but that oldness seemed to have deepened. It was the direction Yeonbun had found. As she left, the woman said briefly, "More dignified than new." Where that word spread from and to, I couldn't know. But after that, people bringing fabric of similar quality increased. Some came directly, some entrusted through someone. Sent by some household's mistress or come from some high official's house. Though names weren't revealed, the items spoke. At the small workshop with no proper sign near the laundry area outside Namdamun, upper-class fabrics began quietly coming and going. I was glad for that change, but on the other hand, I kept thinking about something. Color more dignified than new. Those words kept circling in my head. That was ultimately what we were doing. Not creating something flashy and new, but finding and returning the best appearance of what already existed. Not adding but reviving. That was also what Father had contained in the dyeing manual. Father didn't record successes but recorded failures. How fabric changed when something was handled wrongly, what was salvaged from there. The essence of that book wasn't how to do well, but knowing where to return when things went wrong. Reviving. That was what Father had done throughout his life, and what Yeonbun and I were doing now. Why my brother's method and mine differed, I think I could finally explain it in words around that time. My brother tried to appear large, I tried to deepen. My brother chased the new, I tried to revive the old. No one could assert at that point which was right. But the directions were different, and those directions were diverging further as time passed. And between that distance, it was only a matter of time before something decisive happened to one of the two. My brother came on an evening 3 days after the first snow fell. The sound of knocking on the door was small. It wasn't the sound a confident hand would make. I was inside looking at the dyeing manual, and Yeonbun was organizing ash for the next day on the workshop side. When I opened the door, my brother stood there. I recognized him at a glance. But how unbelievable it was that I recognized him at a glance. My brother's appearance had changed that much. His clothes were worn. It was a cold day, yet what he wore outside was thin and his shoes were wet. His face was gaunt, and his eyes somehow seemed to have lost focus. Even while looking at me, my brother said nothing at first. He tried to open his mouth, then closed it again. He repeated this perhaps twice. I didn't speak either. After a long while, my brother spoke. Lost it all. That was everything. No explanation, no excuses. How the shop had ended up, how much the debt was, how people had left. My brother said none of it. Within those 3 words, lost it all, everything was contained, and both my brother and I knew it. I didn't close the door, but I didn't bring my brother into the warm room. While telling him to come inside, I walked not toward the room, but toward the shed behind the workshop. I felt my brother pause briefly. I didn't look back. I opened the shed door and lit a fire inside. I brought and laid down a blanket. Yanbun noticed and brought a bowl of rice. She set it down wordlessly and left. My brother looked around inside the shed. He said nothing. I sat before my brother. These were words I had thought about for a long time. From some moment I had known my brother would come like this. So I had thought about it beforehand. Yet with my brother actually before me, the words I'd prepared felt too cold. But there was nothing else I could say differently. I spoke slowly. You cannot hold the sign again. My brother's eyes moved. He looked at me. Instead, heat water, filter ash, hang cloth, and watch over it until the color dries. If you do that work, you can stay here. My brother said nothing for a long while. I could see the hand pulling the blanket to his knees, trembling. Whether from cold or another reason, I couldn't know. He looked at the rice bowl, looked at the floor, then looked at me again. Something passed through my brother's eyes. It was humiliation. Though I knew this, I didn't change my words. My brother began work the next morning. The first few days, nothing went properly. Heating water, filtering ash, hanging cloth. His hands weren't accustomed. My brother had spent his life conducting transactions and meeting people, not using his body inside a workshop. It was natural. But my brother didn't complain, at least not aloud. I knew he was gritting his teeth. It showed in his eyes. I didn't know what expression he wore when alone, but while working, he was moving with that humiliation firmly pressed down. It was the afternoon of the 3rd day. While my brother was hanging cloth, one side tilted. For color to dry evenly, cloth had to hang level. My brother didn't know this. After spreading it twice more and it tilted again, he clicked his tongue low. Perhaps hearing that sound, Yanbun approached. Yanbun said nothing. She simply held the cloth's end beside my brother's hand and showed him the angle. My brother followed. The cloth hung properly. My brother looked at Yanbun. Yanbun was already walking toward the other side. My brother gazed at that retreating back for a while. That evening, my brother asked Yanbun, how did she know? Who taught her? Yanbun paused briefly. Then she said, reputation is what people give you. Color cannot lie. Whether my brother immediately understood the meaning of those words, I don't know. Hearing those words from beside, I couldn't move for a while, because I thought those words might not be only for my brother, perhaps also for me, perhaps about everything in this workshop. Color cannot lie. If materials were bad, color revealed it. If temperature was wrong, color revealed it. If hands rushed, color revealed it. Color contained the process as it was. It couldn't deceive, cover, or disguise. That the fabric my brother delivered bled when rain fell was ultimately the result of color not lying. My brother changed after that day. He changed slowly. It didn't happen overnight. He began checking temperature once more when heating water, began filtering slowly when filtering ash. He began looking at angle first when hanging cloth. His words decreased. My brother had originally been talkative, but inside the workshop he gradually became quieter. One day I saw my brother sitting alone in the workshop, holding dried cloth in his hands, simply looking. Not checking something, not preparing the next task, just looking at cloth. That sight was unfamiliar. And while unfamiliar, it somehow overlapped with Father's appearance. I passed without saying anything. Spring came. My brother still remained on the shed side. I didn't say to come into the room, and my brother didn't ask. Which of us would first remove that boundary? Neither of us rushed. Time had work to do. The dyeing workshop was quietly growing. We didn't change the sign, didn't move locations. Outside Nam De Moon, near the laundry area, 2 rooms with a clearing too embarrassing to call a courtyard. It remained the same. But the quality of fabric coming and going had changed, and the manner of people visiting had changed. Many customers came without stating names, but those nameless customers had words they said when returning. The house that revives fabric. I don't know when that phrase began circulating. Don't know who first called it that. But from some moment, people called this place that. Not a place that makes new clothes, but a place that revives what existed. Not making things flashy, but returning things to the best appearance of what they originally possessed. I like that name. I now understand somewhat differently what Father left behind. The box containing silver coins and documents was strength to live in the present. That was important. It wasn't a wrong choice. That my brother chose it also had its own reasons. But when the present disappeared, that strength also disappeared. The present was always something depleted. The dyeing manual and seal were strength to create what comes next. Recording failures, accumulating what was salvaged from those failures. That wasn't depleted. The more it was used, the deeper it became. The more the user's hands learned it, the more it became theirs. Father probably knew this. That's why when presenting the 2 boxes, he didn't speak of shops and fields. He wasn't asking what you possess now, but where you will stand going forward. The words that your name will remain as you choose weren't a warning. Simply fact. People are ultimately remembered by what they chose. I thought of Yeonbun. Yeonbun hadn't chosen anything. No box, no choice. She was just working in the kitchen when I called, and she nodded. But what made this place was Yeonbun's hands, Yeonbun's sense. Things her hands remembered. Reputation is what people give you, and color cannot lie. When I first heard those words, I thought they were for my brother. A bit later, I thought they were also for me. Now I think they're about this entire work. About dyeing, about craft, about the whole of people creating something. Process remained in color. What was rushed remained. What was cherished remained. What was abandoned remained. It didn't lie. Several years have passed since Father died. The sign Kang Dye House no longer exists. I know what became of that place, but there's no need to speak of it here. My brother is still in this workshop. I don't remember exactly when he moved from shed to room. One day I saw it was so. My brother's words are still few, and his hands became fast. Yeonbun still speaks little. But watching the direction Yeonbun moves in the workshop, I could know what would happen next. Working together for so long, I gradually learned how to read Yeonbun's hands. That may have been the most important thing Father gave me. Not what was in the book, but what I learned holding the book while working beside Yeonbun. The house that revives fabric. By that name we are still here. Not flashy, not large, the sign still humble. But there are people who visit, and people living somewhere wearing fabric we returned. Perhaps someone somewhere is saying more dignified than new. I opened the dyeing manual today too. Father's writing is still not neat. There are hastily written parts, and cases where margin notes matter more than main text. Parts recording failures far outnumber successes. I read those failure parts most often. And beside them, now my writing also accumulates bit by bit. If someday there's someone who receives this manual, that person will also read my failures and salvage something from there. That's how it continues. From Father to me, from me to next. Color cannot lie. And I think that is the reason this work continues.